Something doesn't feel right. Teresa Brown whispered those words into her phone in the ladies' room of La Vincenza, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. She stared at her reflection in the gold-framed mirror, emerald green dress hugging her curves, pearl earrings catching the light, makeup flawless. She looked like she belonged here. She felt like she was walking into a trap. The text she'd just sent to her best friend, Sarah, read, "This was a mistake. Frank gives me bad vibes." Sarah's response came immediately. "You promised you'd give him a chance. He's a VP at his company, T. When was the last time you went out with someone who had their life together?" Teresa closed her eyes. When was the last time? She could recite the disappointing list without effort. Marcus, who'd promised her the world for 8 months before ghosting when she mentioned meeting his parents. Darius, who'd slowly revealed he was still legally married. Antoine, whose idea of commitment was, let's keep things casual and see what happens for an entire year. 1 year. Frank Miller is different, Sarah had insisted when she'd set up this blind date. He's ambitious. He's successful. He's ready for something real. And Teresa, you're 29 now. Good men who actually want commitment don't just fall from the sky. So Teresa had agreed. One dinner at La Vincenza, Saturday at 8 p.m., just to prove to Sarah, and maybe to herself, that she was still open to possibilities, still willing to try. But from the moment she'd sat down across from Frank 30 minutes ago, every instinct in her body had been screaming run, the way he'd looked her up and down when she arrived, like he was appraising merchandise. The way he'd ordered for her without asking what she wanted, the way he'd leaned too close when he talked, invading her space with expensive cologne and entitled presumption. "You should loosen up a little," he'd said, sliding a glass of Bordeaux toward her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You seem tense." Teresa had hesitated, her fingers hovering over the stem of the wine glass. Something about the way Frank was watching her, waiting, made her skin crawl. But she could hear Sarah's voice in her head. "You're being too picky. You're too guarded. You're going to end up alone." She'd reached for the glass, and that's when she'd excused herself to the bathroom, phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Now, staring at her reflection, Teresa made a decision. She was leaving. She didn't care if Sarah called her dramatic. She didn't care if Frank thought she was rude. She was done ignoring the voice inside her that had kept her safe for 29 years. She pushed open the bathroom door and headed back to the table. But what Teresa didn't know was that someone else in that restaurant had been watching Frank Miller all evening. Taeyeon sat 4 tables away, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him, his dark eyes tracking every move Frank made. The tattoos creeping up his neck were partially hidden beneath his white dress shirt, unbuttoned just enough to hint at the intricate ink that marked him as something far more dangerous than the legitimate businessman he appeared to be. He'd watched Frank tear open a small packet when Teresa went to the bathroom, watched him pour white powder into her wine glass with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before, watched him stir it with her spoon, then lean back with that smug, satisfied expression. Taeyeon's hand tightened on his glass. Frank Miller didn't know it yet, but he'd just made the last mistake of his free life, because Taeyeon knew exactly who Frank was. A mid-level corporate parasite who'd racked up over $200,000 in gambling debts to the Chongryong faction, the very organization Taeyeon's rivals had been using to launder money through, Manhattan's underground poker circuit. And now Frank was here, in Taeyeon's restaurant, drugging an innocent woman. Not tonight. When Teresa walked back to the table, Taeyeon was already moving. "Miss, my apologies." He stepped forward just as Teresa reached for her chair, his movement calculated, precise. His shoulder brushed the edge of their table, creating just enough disruption. The wine glasses shifted. In the half-second of distraction, Taeyeon's hand moved like a shadow. The glasses switched positions so smoothly that even Teresa, looking directly at the table, didn't register the change. "So sorry," Taeyeon murmured, steadying himself against the back of Teresa's chair. His eyes met hers for one electric moment, dark, intense, filled with something she couldn't name. Then he stepped away, melting back toward his own table. Teresa sat down slowly, her heart pounding. That man. Who was he? Everything okay? Frank asked, his voice dripping with false concern. He lifted his wine glass. You barely touched your drink. Come on, Teresa. One toast. To new beginnings? He raised the glass to his lips and took a long, confident swallow. Teresa watched, frozen, as Frank's expression changed. Confusion first, then alarm. His eyes went wide. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering against his plate. Frank? Teresa leaned forward. Are you... His pupils dilated. His breathing turned shallow. And then, with a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan, Frank Miller's eyes rolled back in his head. He collapsed, face first into his risotto. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Waiters rushed over. Someone screamed. A manager appeared, phone already pressed to his ear, calling for an ambulance. And through it all, Teresa sat paralyzed, her hands clutching a white napkin to her chest, her mind trying to process what had just happened. Then a hand rested on the back of her chair. Firm, possessive, protective, she looked up. The man with the tattoos stood beside her, his presence commanding enough to make the chaos around them seem distant. He looked down at her with those dark predator eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was low, calm, absolute. I believe your date is finished, Miss Brown. Teresa's breath caught. But your night doesn't have to be. What happened next would force Teresa to choose between the safe life she'd always known and a dangerous love that would shatter every rule she'd ever followed. But to understand how a blind date turned into a war between criminal empires, we need to go back 1 week to the conversation that started everything. 1 week earlier, Teresa's phone buzzed for the 7th time that evening as she sat curled up in her Brooklyn apartment. A half-empty glass of Pinot Grigio on the coffee table beside her iPad, where she'd been trying to finish a marketing presentation for the past 2 hours. Sarah. Again. She'd been dodging her best friend's calls for days, ever since she'd made the mistake of admitting at their last brunch that she'd deleted her dating apps. I'm taking a break, Teresa had explained over mimosas at their usual spot in Fort Greene. I'm tired of wasting time on men who don't know what they want. Sarah had given her that look. The one that said, here we go again. Teresa Marie Brown, Sarah had said, deploying the full-name treatment that always made Teresa feel like she was being scolded by her mother. You can't just give up on dating because you've had some bad experiences. Some bad experiences. That's what Sarah called the string of disappointments that had defined Teresa's 20s. When the phone rang for the 8th time, Teresa finally answered. Why are you avoiding me? I'm not avoiding you, Sarah. I've been busy with the product launch. Too busy to hear about the perfect guy I want to set you up with? Teresa closed her eyes. Sarah. His name is Frank Miller. He's a VP at Cordova Investments. He's educated, ambitious, financially stable, and wait for it, he actually wants a serious relationship. That's what they all say. Teresa, I'm serious. My colleague Jennifer has known him for 3 years. He's the real deal. And he specifically asked about you after he saw your photo from our company holiday party. Teresa took a long sip of wine. I don't know. T. You're 29, Sarah said softly. I know you've been hurt before, but you can't let fear keep you from even trying. What if Frank is different? What if this is the one time you take a chance and it actually works out? What if... Those 2 words that had haunted Teresa for years. What if she was too picky? What if she was self-sabotaging? What if her standards were impossible to meet? 1 dinner, Sarah pressed. That's all I'm asking. La Vincenza. Saturday night. If you hate him after appetizers, you can fake a work emergency and leave, but at least give yourself the chance. Teresa stared at the ceiling of her apartment, at the exposed brick she'd fallen in love with when she'd signed the lease 2 years ago, back when she'd still believed that building the perfect life would somehow lead to finding the perfect person to share it with. Fine, she heard herself say. 1 dinner, Sarah squealed. You won't regret this, T. I promise. But as Teresa hung up the phone, she felt that familiar tightness in her chest. The same feeling she'd learned to ignore over and over again in the name of being reasonable, being open-minded, being fair. The feeling that something was wrong. She just didn't know yet how wrong. Or that the stranger who would save her life was already watching Frank Miller. Already planning. Already moving pieces into place for a game Teresa didn't even know she was playing. Before we continue with how Teresa ended up in that restaurant and what Taeyeon did next, take a moment to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It truly means so much to see this community growing. Every like, share, and comment you leave helps us bring you more stories about recognizing danger, trusting your instincts, and finding protection in the most unexpected places together. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, but to Teresa, it felt like 6 hours. She sat frozen in her chair, watching as 2 EMTs in navy blue uniforms checked Frank's vitals, shined a light in his unresponsive eyes, and loaded him onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. The other diners had been ushered to the bar area, their murmured conversations creating a low buzz of speculation that made Teresa's skin crawl. What happened? Did you see that? Is he dead? Some kind of allergic reaction? Heart attack? Drugs? Drugs. Teresa's mind raced back to the wine glass, to the moment before she'd gone to the bathroom. Had there been something in her drink? But Frank was the one who collapsed. Nothing made sense. Miss Brown? She looked up to find a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit standing beside her table. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of composed expression that suggested he'd handled far worse situations than a guest collapsing during dinner service. I'm Marcus Chen, the general manager of La Vincenza, he said smoothly. I cannot express how deeply sorry I am about this incident. We've never had anything like this happen in our establishment. Teresa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The owner would like to speak with you personally, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the back of the restaurant. If you're feeling up to it, I don't understand what happened, Teresa managed. 1 minute we were talking, and then the paramedics believe it may have been a medical episode, Marcus said carefully. They're taking him to Mount Sinai. But Mr. Park wanted to ensure you're all right, and to offer his personal apologies for your evening being disrupted this way. Teresa barely registered the name. She let Marcus guide her through the restaurant, past the curious stares of other patrons, toward a private hallway she hadn't noticed before. The man with the tattoos was waiting in an office that looked more like a luxury lounge than a workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline. A glass desk held nothing but a laptop and a single tumbler of amber liquid. He stood with his back to the door, hands in his pockets, silhouetted against the city lights. When he turned, Teresa's breath caught. In the chaos of the dining room, she hadn't fully registered how striking he was. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, eyes so dark they looked black in the low light. The tattoos she'd glimpsed earlier now seemed to pulse with menace beneath his collar, intricate patterns that spoke of things she didn't understand but instinctively feared. Miss Brown, he said, his accent barely detectable, refined. I'm Taeyeon Park. I own La Vincenza. Teresa's mind stuttered. You're the owner? Among other establishments in the city. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, stopping just close enough to make her pulse quicken. Please, sit. You've had a shock. She sank into the leather chair across from his desk because her legs suddenly felt unreliable. I don't understand what happened, she said again. Frank was fine. And then, the paramedics will determine what caused his collapse. Taeyeon interrupted gently. What matters now is making sure you're safe. Do you have someone who can take you home? A friend? Family? Teresa thought of Sarah, who would demand a play-by-play explanation Teresa didn't have the energy to give. I can get an Uber. Absolutely not. His tone left no room for argument. You're shaken. I'll have my driver take you home. That's really not necessary. Miss Brown. He leaned against his desk, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Concern? Calculation? Both? A guest collapsed at one of my restaurants while having dinner with you. The least I can do is ensure you get home safely. Please, allow me this small gesture. There was something in his voice that made it impossible to refuse. Or maybe Teresa was just too exhausted to argue. 20 minutes later, she found herself in the back of a black Mercedes SUV with tinted windows, being driven through Manhattan by a silent man in a dark suit who hadn't spoken a single word since opening the door for her. Taeyeon sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. "How did you know my last name?" Teresa asked suddenly. "I never told anyone at the restaurant my full name." "Your reservation was under Frank Miller's corporate account," Taeyeon replied smoothly. "It listed both guests. I wanted to make sure I addressed you properly." It was a reasonable explanation. So why did it feel like a half-truth? The SUV pulled up outside her Brooklyn brownstone building. Teresa reached for the door handle, but Taeyeon was faster, exiting the vehicle and coming around to open her door with old-world courtesy that felt anachronistic in modern New York. "Thank you," she said, stepping onto the sidewalk. "For everything. The ride. Making sure I was okay. Lock your door when you get inside," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. And Teresa? The sound of her first name in his mouth sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Trust your instincts next time," he said quietly. "They were trying to tell you something tonight." Before she could ask what he meant, he was back in the SUV, the vehicle pulling away from the curb and disappearing into the Brooklyn night. Teresa stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, her heart pounding, before finally climbing the steps to her apartment. It wasn't until she'd changed into pajamas, washed off her makeup, and crawled into bed that she realized she'd never told Taeyeon which building was hers. She'd just said, Brooklyn, and somehow, the driver had known exactly where to go. She reached for her phone to text Sarah, then stopped. What would she even say? "Hey!" My blind date collapsed. The restaurant owner personally drove me home, and I think maybe something really weird is going on. Teresa set the phone down and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come and take away the strange, electric feeling that had been coursing through her body since the moment Taeyeon's hand had rested on the back of her chair. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through her bedroom window, and for one blissful moment, she thought maybe the entire night had been a bizarre dream. Then she saw the note. It sat on her nightstand, folded once, heavy cardstock that felt expensive between her fingers. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, elegant, each letter formed with the kind of care that suggested the writer had been taught calligraphy. "Trust your instincts next time." Or "Trust me. T. Y." Below the message was a phone number. Nothing else. Teresa stared at the note for a full minute, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. Had Taeyeon come into her apartment while she was sleeping? Had someone else delivered it? When? How? She looked around her bedroom. Nothing else seemed disturbed. Her purse sat on the chair where she'd dropped it. Her keys were on the dresser. The deadbolt on her front door was still engaged from the inside. The note shouldn't exist, but it did, solid and real in her trembling hands. Teresa grabbed her phone and called Sarah. "Oh my God, T. I've been trying to reach you since last night." Sarah's voice was pitched high with concern. "Jennifer texted me saying Frank had some kind of medical emergency at the restaurant. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Teresa said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "Sarah, what do you know about Frank Miller?" "What do you mean?" "I told you. He's a VP at Cordova Investments. No, I mean, really know about him. Has Jennifer ever mentioned anything weird? Anything that seemed off?" There was a pause. "T, what happened?" Teresa closed her eyes. "I don't know, but something about last night felt wrong. Really wrong. Okay, you're scaring me. Do you want me to come over?" "No, I'm okay. I need to get ready for work. Can you ask Jennifer if there's anything about Frank I should know? Anything at all? Of course. But Teresa, are you sure you're all right? Yeah. I'll call you later. She hung up before Sarah could press further and stood under a scalding shower for 20 minutes, trying to wash away the feeling that her life had fundamentally shifted overnight in ways she didn't yet understand. By the time she arrived at the marketing agency where she worked as a senior account manager, Teresa had almost convinced herself she was overreacting. Frank had a medical episode. The owner of the restaurant was being kind. The note was probably delivered by a doorman she didn't remember seeing. Everything had a rational explanation. She was reviewing campaign analytics at her desk when her assistant, David, appeared in her doorway looking uncomfortable. Teresa? There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insisting it's urgent. Who is it? Marcus shifted his weight. Frank Miller? Teresa's blood ran cold. What? He says he needs to speak with you. Security's with him in the lobby, but he's getting kind of agitated. Teresa grabbed her phone and stood. Tell security I'm coming down. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt endless. When the doors opened, she heard Frank's voice before she saw him. Perfectly reasonable request. I just need 5 minutes of her time. He stood in the marble lobby of her building, still wearing the same black suit from last night, though now it was wrinkled and stained. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. 2 security guards flanked him, their hands hovering near their belts in a way that suggested they were ready to intervene if necessary. Frank? Teresa stayed near the elevator bank, maintaining distance. What are you doing here? His head snapped toward her, and the expression on his face made her take an involuntary step back. Rage. Pure, undiluted rage. What am I doing here? His voice rose. What am I doing here? You drugged me, Teresa. The lobby went silent. Teresa was aware of her coworkers stopping mid-stride, of the receptionist's eyes going wide. I didn't. The hospital ran tests. Frank advanced toward her, but the security guards moved with him, creating a human barrier. They found Rohypnol in my system. You put something in my drink. And now you won't even take my calls? I could have died. Teresa's mind reeled. Rohypnol, the date rape drug. But she hadn't touched his drink, she hadn't. And then, with horrible clarity, she understood. The wine glass Frank had slid toward her, his insistence that she drink it, the way he'd been watching her, waiting. He'd drugged her drink, or tried to, but somehow, impossibly, he'd ended up drinking it himself. The man with the tattoos, the collision with the table, the glasses switching. Trust your instincts next time. Frank, you need to leave, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Right now. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what the hell you did. He tried to push past the security guards. Do you have any idea what this has done to my reputation? The hospital called the police. I had to explain to detectives that I wasn't trying to. He stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what he'd almost admitted. You need to leave, Teresa repeated, or I'm calling the police myself. You think you can just... Miss Brown is correct. The voice came from behind her, low and calm and absolutely lethal in its quietness. Teresa spun around. Taeyeon stood in the lobby entrance, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He moved past her with the same predatory grace she'd seen last night, walking directly toward Frank with deliberate, unhurried steps. The security guards instinctively stepped aside. Taeyeon stopped inches from Frank, close enough that he had to lean down slightly to speak. Teresa couldn't hear what he said. Nobody could. It was just a whisper, maybe a dozen words at most, delivered directly into Frank's ear, whatever those words were. They drained the color from Frank's face. He stumbled backward, eyes wide, and for a moment Teresa thought he might faint again. Then he turned and half ran, half stumbled toward the exit, pushing through the glass doors and disappearing onto the street. Taeyeon watched him go, expression unchanged, before turning to face Teresa. We need to talk, he said. Somewhere private. Teresa's hands were shaking. Who are you? Not here. His eyes flicked toward the lobby audience, the receptionist, the security guards, her coworkers pretending not to stare. Please, I'll explain everything, but not here. Every rational part of Teresa's brain screamed at her to refuse, to demand he leave, to call the actual police, but the same instinct that had warned her about Frank last night was now telling her something different about Tae-yun. Dangerous? Yes, absolutely, but not to her. My office, she heard herself say. 10th floor. He nodded once and followed her to the elevator. They rode up in silence, the air between them thick with unasked questions. When they reached the privacy of her small but tastefully decorated office, Teresa closed the door and leaned against it. Start talking, she said. What did you say to Frank? How did you know I was in trouble? And why did you leave that note in my apartment? In order, Tae-yun said calmly, settling into the chair across from her desk as if he'd been invited to a business meeting. I told Frank Miller that if he came near you again, I would personally ensure that the $230,000 he owes in gambling debts would be called in immediately, and that the people he owes would not be as patient as they've been. I knew you were in trouble because Frank has been on my radar for months, and I left the note because I wanted you to have a way to contact me if you needed help. Teresa processed this information in stunned silence. Gambling debts? She finally said. 200,000. 230,000, Tae-yun corrected. Give or take. Frank has been running up debts with underground poker games across Manhattan for the past year. The kind of games where the people running them don't accept "I'll pay you back next month" as an answer. And you know this because? Because I own some of those games. The words hung in the air between them. Teresa should have been afraid. Should have been calling security, calling the police, getting this man out of her office and out of her life. Instead, she found herself walking to her desk, sitting down across from him, and asking the question that had been burning in her mind since last night. Why did you help me? Tae-yun was quiet for a moment, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Because Frank Miller is a predator, he said finally. And because you didn't deserve what he was planning to do to you. It was that simple. Nothing about this feels simple. No, he agreed. It's not. What do you want from me? Nothing you're not willing to give. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity making the air feel electric. But I think you deserve to know the truth about what happened last night, and about who Frank Miller really is. If you're willing to have dinner with me, a real dinner. Not whatever that nightmare was, I'll tell you everything. Teresa laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. You want me to have dinner with you? After all this? I'm not asking for trust, Teresa. I'm asking for a conversation. One meal. If you want to walk away after that, I'll respect it. But I think you have questions, and I'm the only one who can answer them. He was right. God help her, he was right. When? She asked. Tonight. My place. I'll send a car for you at 7. Your place? Teresa raised an eyebrow. You don't think that's a little? My penthouse has floor-to-ceiling windows on all sides, Tae-yun said. You can leave at any time. The doorman knows your name and will call you a car the moment you ask. And unlike Frank Miller, I've never needed to drug a woman to have her attention. The confidence in his voice should have been arrogant. Instead, it was simply factual. Teresa knew she should say no. Knew she should block his number, forget this entire insane situation, and go back to her normal, safe, boring life. But her normal, safe, boring life had almost gotten her assaulted 2 nights ago. And this dangerous man with the tattoos and the secrets had saved her. 7 o'clock, she said. And Tae-yun? If this is some kind of game? It's not a game, he interrupted, standing. It's the truth, which is often more dangerous than any game. He left her office as silently as he'd arrived, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of expensive cologne and the feeling that Teresa's life had just pivoted in a direction she couldn't begin to predict. At precisely 7 o'clock, a black Mercedes SUV pulled up outside her apartment building. The same silent driver from Saturday night opened the door for her, and Teresa climbed in wearing a simple black dress and carrying a can of pepper spray in her purse that she'd bought during her lunch break, just in case. The drive took them deeper into Manhattan, into the kind of neighborhood where apartments cost more than most people made in a decade. The building Taeyeon lived in was all glass and steel, modern and imposing, with a doorman who greeted her by name. Miss Brown, Mr. Park is expecting you. Penthouse level. The elevator ride was smooth and silent. When the doors opened, they revealed not a hallway but a single door. The entire top floor was one residence. Taeyeon answered on the first knock, dressed in black slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. For the first time, Teresa could see his tattoos clearly. They weren't random designs. They were a story, intricate scenes that flowed from his wrists, up his forearms, and disappeared beneath his shirt. Dragons, cherry blossoms, characters in a language she didn't read but recognized as Korean. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The penthouse was exactly as he'd described. Windows everywhere, offering a 360-degree view of Manhattan at night. The decor was minimal but expensive, clean lines, dark wood, leather furniture that looked butter-soft. "Wine?" he offered, gesturing to a bottle already open on the kitchen island. "No," Teresa said automatically, then felt ridiculous. "Sorry, I understand." He poured himself a glass, then very deliberately took a sip before pouring a second and offering it to her. Trust has to be earned. She accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his briefly in the exchange. Dinner was already prepared. Someone had clearly been here earlier to set everything up. Grilled salmon with asparagus, roasted potatoes, a salad that looked too artful to be from a delivery service. They ate in his dining room, the city lights spread out beneath them like a carpet of stars. "You said you'd tell me everything," Teresa said finally, setting down her fork. "So tell me, who are you, really?" Taeyeon set down his own fork and unbuttoned his shirt another button, pulling the collar aside to reveal more of the tattoo work on his chest and shoulder. "My family has been involved in organized crime for 3 generations, he said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "In Korea, we were affiliated with what Americans would call the Yakuza, though the reality is more complicated than that. When I came to New York 15 years ago, I brought connections and resources. I've built them into legitimate businesses and less legitimate operations." Teresa's wine glass felt suddenly heavy in her hand. "I own 17 restaurants across Manhattan," he continued. 4 nightclubs, 3 parking garages, 2 shipping companies, and I have financial interests in various enterprises that operate outside the bounds of typical business regulation. "You're telling me you're in the Mafia?" "I'm telling you I operate in spaces where the law is flexible and power is earned, not given." He met her eyes steadily. "I'm telling you that I've done things you would find morally questionable, if not outright reprehensible. I'm also telling you that I have a code. Children are off limits. Non-consensual acts are punished severely within my organization, and men like Frank Miller, predators who use drugs and manipulation to harm women, they don't get to operate in my city without consequences." "Is that why you were watching him?" "Frank owes money to the Cheongryong faction, a rival organization that's been trying to expand their territory into my businesses. They've been using his debts as leverage, trying to get him to provide information about my operations. He's a small fish, but small fish can still cause problems if they're desperate enough." Teresa processed this, her mind struggling to reconcile the man sitting across from her calm, articulate, almost gentle in his explanations with the criminal he was describing. "The drug in my wine," she said slowly. "It was yours?" "It was stolen from a shipment that was supposed to go to one of my pharmaceutical contacts. When I found out Frank had obtained it, I knew someone in my organization had betrayed me. That's why I was at the restaurant that night. I was monitoring Frank, waiting to see who he'd meet with, who had supplied him with the drug, and then he used it on me." "Yes." Something flickered in Taeyeon's expression. Anger, tightly controlled, which made the situation personal in a way I hadn't anticipated. "You switched the glasses." "I switched the glasses," he confirmed. "Frank drank his own poison." Poetic justice, I thought. Teresa stood abruptly, walking to the windows, needing space to think. The city sprawled beneath her, millions of people living their normal lives, completely unaware of the shadow world Taeyeon was describing. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, not turning around. "Why bring me here? Why tell me the truth?" She heard him stand, felt him approach, though he stopped several feet away, respecting her space. "Because you deserve to know who saved you," he said quietly. "Because I don't want you afraid of me. And because, Teresa, you've been on my mind since the moment I saw you walk into that restaurant looking like you'd rather be anywhere else." She turned to face him. "I don't understand. I noticed you before I noticed Frank's plan," Taeyeon said. And for the first time, she heard something vulnerable in his voice. "You were beautiful and uncomfortable and clearly too good for the man sitting across from you. When I saw what he was trying to do, I was furious. Not just because he was using my stolen property, because he was trying to hurt you." Teresa's heart hammered in her chest. "This is insane," she whispered. "Everything about this is insane. I know. You're a criminal. Yes, I should be running away from you as fast as possible." "You probably should," he agreed. "But you're not. Why is that?" Teresa didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had too many answers, and none of them made rational sense, because he'd saved her when he didn't have to. Because he'd been honest when he could have lied. Because when she looked at him, she felt safer than she'd felt in years, even knowing what he was. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Taeyeon pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. "My driver will take you home whenever you're ready." "But Teresa? Frank Miller is still a problem. He's desperate. He's angry. And desperate. Angry men do stupid things. Until this situation is resolved, I'd like to have someone watching your building, just to make sure you're safe. You want to assign me a bodyguard? I want to make sure the man who tried to drug you doesn't try something worse." It should have felt controlling, invasive. Instead, it felt like care. "Okay," Teresa heard herself say. "For now, okay." Taeyeon nodded, and something in his expression softened. The car ride home was quiet, Teresa's mind spinning with everything she'd learned. When she finally crawled into bed after midnight, she expected to lie awake for hours. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her dreams filled with dark eyes and city lights, and the feeling of being watched over by someone far more dangerous than the monsters he protected her from. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Teresa went to work, came home, ordered takeout, and tried to pretend her life hadn't been fundamentally altered by a tattooed Korean crime boss who sent her good morning texts and had a black sedan parked outside her building 24 hours a day. She didn't see Taeyeon in person, but she felt his presence everywhere. The security guard at her office building who seemed to materialize whenever she arrived or left. The barista at her usual coffee shop who refused to let her pay, saying her tab had been taken care of. The way her subway commute felt inexplicably safer, as if invisible eyes were watching over her. Sarah called repeatedly, demanding details about the hot guy from the restaurant that Jennifer had heard about through some corporate gossip chain. Teresa deflected, made excuses, and tried not to think about how good it felt to have someone care whether she made it home safely. On Thursday evening, Teresa's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Frank is planning something. Be careful." A concerned friend. She immediately forwarded it to Taeyeon. She stared at her phone for a long moment, then pulled up Taeyeon's number and texted, "Just got a weird message. Someone warning me about Frank. Said Frank is paranoid and making threats." The response came within seconds. Name? Victor Chen. Said he's an attorney. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Stay inside tonight. I'm sending additional security to your building." Taeyeon's next message came a moment later. "Victor Chen isn't Frank's attorney. He's one of the Viper's men. They're probing to see how much you know. Don't engage with any unknown numbers. Teresa wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself, but the memory of Frank's rage in her office lobby was too fresh. Instead, she texted back, "Okay, another message. Thank you for trusting me." She fell asleep that night with her phone on the nightstand, half expecting it to ring with more threats, more warnings, more intrusions into the carefully controlled life she'd built for herself. What she didn't know was that across town, in a dimly lit private room at a nightclub Taeyeon didn't own, Frank Miller was making a deal with the devil. The man who called himself the Viper was older than Frank expected, mid-50s with silver hair and a face that had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be shocked by anything anymore. He sat across from Frank in a booth, flanked by two men who looked like they ate people for breakfast and picked their teeth with the bones. "Let me make sure I understand," the Viper said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "You want me to erase your debt $230,000 in exchange for helping us eliminate a competitor?" "Not eliminate," Frank said quickly. He'd been drinking for courage, and his words slurred slightly. "Just discredit. Embarrass. Make him vulnerable." "Taeyeon Park doesn't embarrass easily," the Viper observed. "He's built his empire on control and fear. What makes you think you can touch him?" "The girl. Teresa." Frank leaned forward, warming to his subject. "He's got a thing for her. I've been watching. He's got men following her, protecting her. She's his weakness." The Viper's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Interest. Go on. We use her to lure him out, make him think she's in danger. When he comes to play hero, you do whatever you need to do. I just want him to suffer the way he made me suffer. And the girl, what happens to her in this scenario?" Frank shrugged, the gesture revealing exactly how much he'd thought about Teresa's welfare. "That's your problem. I just want Park destroyed." The Viper was quiet for a long moment, studying Frank with the kind of intensity that made lesser men confess to crimes they hadn't committed. "All right," he said finally. "I'll clear your debt, but you'll do exactly as I say when I say it. And if you betray me the way you're betraying Park, well," he smiled, showing too many teeth. "Let's just say your debt would be the least of your problems." Frank nodded eagerly, too relieved to recognize the trap he'd just walked into. "There's a woman," the Viper continued. "Sarah Martinez. She's Teresa's friend, correct? The one who arranged your initial date?" "Yeah, but she won't help me. She thinks I'm—" "She'll help if she's properly motivated." The Viper slid a folder across the table. "Sarah's younger brother, Miguel, is currently on probation for drug possession. It would be unfortunate if new evidence came to light suggesting he was dealing rather than simply using. Very unfortunate for his future prospects." Frank stared at the folder, some dim part of his conscience trying to surface through the alcohol in desperation. "You want me to blackmail her? I want you to give her a choice. Help us. And her brother's record stays clean. Refuse, and he goes to prison for 5 to 10 years. The Viper stood, his men rising with him like synchronized shadows. "You have 48 hours to get Teresa Brown to the location we specify. Don't disappoint me, Frank. I'm much less forgiving than Taeyeon Park." They left Frank sitting alone in the booth, the folder in front of him, the weight of what he'd just agreed to settling onto his shoulders like a stone. But Frank Miller had never been good at thinking beyond his own immediate needs. And right now, all he could think about was revenge. Sarah called Teresa on Friday afternoon, her voice tight with stress. I need to see you. Can you meet me for coffee after work? Is everything okay? Just, please. Our usual place. 5:30? Teresa agreed, though something in Sarah's tone set off alarm bells. She texted Taeyeon about the meeting, and his response was immediate. "I'll have someone nearby. Be careful." The cafe was in Fort Greene, a place they'd been meeting for years. Sarah was already there when Teresa arrived, hunched over a cup of tea that looked untouched, her usual bright energy dimmed to something anxious and fragile. "Hey," Teresa said, sliding into the seat across from her. "What's going on?" You sounded weird on the phone. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, T. I'm so sorry. Sorry for what? It's Miguel. He's in trouble. Bad trouble. And the only way to fix it is, she stopped, shaking her head. I can't do this to you. Teresa reached across the table, gripping Sarah's hand. Talk to me. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Frank came to see me. Sarah whispered. He has evidence that could send Miguel to prison. Real prison, Teresa. Not probation, not community service. 5 to 10 years for drug dealing charges. Miguel doesn't deal drugs. I know that. You know that. But Frank has something, texts, photos. I don't know, that makes it look like he does. And he said if I don't help him, he'll give everything to the police. Teresa's grip tightened. Help him do what? Sarah pulled her hand away, unable to meet Teresa's eyes. He wants you to meet him. Tonight. At a warehouse in Red Hook. He says he just wants to talk, to explain everything that happened, to apologize properly. But Teresa, I don't believe him. I think he wants to hurt you, and I'm supposed to convince you to go. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too bright. Teresa's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. This isn't just Frank, is it? Sarah shook her head miserably. There are other people involved. Dangerous people. People who make Frank look like a playground bully. They want to use you to get to someone else. They told Frank exactly what to say to me, exactly how to pressure me. Taeyeon, Teresa said quietly. They want to use me to get to Taeyeon. I don't know who that is, but yes, probably. I told them I wouldn't do it. I told them to go to hell, that I'd never put you in danger. But then they showed me pictures of Miguel. Recent pictures. Pictures of him at his job, at his apartment, at our mom's house. Sarah's voice cracked. They said accidents happen all the time in Brooklyn. They said people disappear. Teresa felt ice spread through her veins. This wasn't just Frank's desperate revenge. This was something bigger, more organized, more deadly. What did you tell them? That I'd try, that I'd meet you and convince you to go. Sarah finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. But I can't, T. I won't. We'll go to the police together. We'll tell them everything. Miguel will understand. He wouldn't want me to sacrifice you to save him. Teresa thought about the Viper's men because it had to be the Viper. Taeyeon had warned her about him watching Miguel, watching Sarah's mother, waiting to see if Sarah would deliver. She thought about Taeyeon, who'd saved her once already, who'd been honest about the darkness of his world while trying to keep her out of it, and she thought about Sarah, her best friend since college, who was being torn apart by an impossible choice. I'll go, Teresa heard herself say. What? No. Teresa, no, but not alone. Teresa pulled out her phone, typing quickly. I'm going to tell Taeyeon exactly what's happening. He'll have people there. This is obviously a trap, which means they're expecting it. So we give them what they expect. But we're ready for it. This is insane. Everything about my life has been insane for a week, Teresa said. But I'm not letting them hurt Miguel, and I'm not letting Frank Miller win. She sent the text to Taeyeon. They're using Sarah's brother to force me to a warehouse in Red Hook tonight. It's a trap. I'm going to walk into it. Please tell me you'll be there. The response came within seconds. What address? Sarah, shaking, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and read off the location. Teresa forwarded it to Taeyeon. His reply made her chest tighten. Don't go. I'll handle this another way. Teresa typed back. If I don't show, they'll know Sarah warned me. They'll hurt Miguel. I have to go, but I'm trusting you to keep me safe. 3 dots appeared and disappeared for nearly a minute. Then, I'll be there. But Teresa, when this is over, we're going to have a serious conversation about the definition of staying safe. Despite everything, she smiled. Okay, she said to Sarah. Text them back. Tell them I agreed to meet Frank. 8 o'clock tonight. And then you're going to take Miguel and your mother to a hotel somewhere far from Brooklyn, and you're going to stay there until I tell you it's safe to come back. Teresa, please, Sarah, trust me. I've got someone watching out for me. Someone who's scarier than whoever's threatening you. Sarah didn't look convinced, but she nodded. At 7:30 that evening, Teresa stood outside the warehouse in Red Hook, her phone clutched in her hand, trying not to let her terror show. The building was exactly what she'd expected from a criminal hideout in a movie, abandoned, industrial, covered in graffiti, with broken windows that looked like empty eye sockets in the fading light. A black van was parked near the entrance. As Teresa approached, the side door slid open, and Frank stepped out. He looked worse than he had at her office. Unshaven, wild-eyed, his expensive suit replaced by jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. "You came," he said, and he sounded genuinely surprised. "Let's just get this over with," Teresa replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "You wanted to talk? So, talk. Not out here." Frank gestured toward the warehouse. "Inside, somewhere private. I'm not going in there. You don't have a choice." Two men emerged from the van, large, armed, professional in a way that made Teresa's stomach drop. These weren't Frank's hired help. These were the Viper's soldiers. One of them grabbed her arm. Teresa didn't fight. Fighting would only make things worse. Instead, she let them lead her into the warehouse, her mind tracking every detail, every possible exit, every place Taeyeon's people might be hiding. "Please," she thought. "Please be here." The interior of the warehouse was cavernous and dark, lit by a few hanging industrial lights that created pools of brightness surrounded by deep shadows. In the center of the space, someone had set up what looked obscenely like a stage, a clear area with a chair, clearly meant for her, and standing behind that chair, hands in the pockets of an expensive suit that looked completely out of place in this setting, was the Viper. "Miss Brown," he said pleasantly. "Thank you for joining us. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but I needed to ensure Taeyeon Park's full attention. And you, my dear, seem to be the key to obtaining it." Teresa's chin lifted. "He's going to kill you for this," the Viper smiled. "He's certainly going to try. In fact, I'm counting on it. You see, Teresa, may I call you Teresa? This isn't really about you at all. You're simply bait for a much larger fish. Frank here thought this was about revenge." He glanced at Frank, who stood near the wall looking increasingly uncertain. "But Frank thinks very small. This is about territory, power, eliminating a competitor who's been a thorn in my side for far too long." One of the men pushed Teresa into the chair. She didn't resist, but she met the Viper's eyes with all the courage she could muster. "Taeyeon won't come alone. I would be disappointed if he did. I've prepared quite a welcome for his entire organization." The Viper pulled out a phone, typed something, then showed Teresa the screen. It was a text to a number she recognized. "I have Teresa. Come to the Red Hook warehouse. Alone, unarmed. You have 1 hour, or she starts losing fingers. He won't believe you'll let either of us go," Teresa said. "He won't. But he'll come anyway, because men like Taeyeon have a fatal flaw. They believe they're invincible, that their power makes them untouchable." The Viper's smile widened. "Tonight, I'm going to teach him otherwise." The hour that followed was the longest of Teresa's life. The Viper's men positioned themselves around the warehouse on catwalks, behind pillars, near exits, at least a dozen of them, all armed, all waiting. Frank paced nervously near the wall, occasionally glancing at Teresa with something that might have been guilt if he'd been capable of that emotion. "This isn't what I wanted," he muttered at one point. "I just wanted him to suffer, not this." "You made a deal with the devil," Teresa said quietly. "What did you think would happen?" "Shut up!" one of the guards barked, but Teresa ignored him. "They're going to kill you too, Frank. You know that, right? Once this is over, you're a loose end. They can't let you walk away knowing what you know." Frank's face went pale, and Teresa saw the moment he realized she was right. At exactly 8:45, every light in the warehouse went out. The darkness was absolute, disorienting. Teresa heard the Viper curse, heard his men scrambling for flashlights and night vision equipment. Then, from somewhere outside, an explosion rocked the building. Not close enough to damage the warehouse itself, but loud enough to send everyone rushing toward the windows, trying to see what had happened. In the chaos and darkness, Teresa felt hands on her wrists, quick, efficient, cutting through whatever they'd used to bind her to the chair. A voice, barely a whisper, right next to her ear. "Stay down. Don't move until I come back for you." It wasn't Taeyon's voice, but she knew it was one of his people. The lights flickered back on, powered by a generator somewhere. The Viper spun around, saw the empty chair, and his composed expression finally cracked. "Find her." Men scattered, searching the shadows. But Teresa had already been moved, pulled behind a stack of old shipping containers by hands that knew exactly what they were doing. "Stay here," her rescuer whispered. Young, Korean, with a shoulder holster visible under his jacket. "Mr. Park is coming." He melted back into the darkness. Teresa crouched behind the containers, heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it, and waited. The Viper's voice echoed through the warehouse. "Park, I know you're here. Show yourself, or I start shooting your people." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Taeyeon stepped out from the shadows near the main entrance, hands raised, completely unarmed, just as the Viper had demanded. But he wasn't alone. He couldn't have been alone, Teresa realized. The explosion, the lights, her rescue, it had all been coordinated. "Let her go," Taeyeon said, his voice carrying across the space with absolute authority. "This is between us. She's not part of this world. She became part of it when she caught your attention," the Viper replied. "Where is she?" "Somewhere safe. Which is more than I can say for you," the Viper laughed. "You're surrounded, Park. I have a dozen men in this building. You're alone. Am I?" The question hung in the air for 3 seconds before all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, not from the Viper's men, but at them. Red laser sights appeared on foreheads and chests. The Viper's soldiers dropped their weapons, hands shooting up in surrender as they realized they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Taeyeon had never been alone. His people had been here all along, hidden, waiting, turning the Viper's trap into one of his own. But the Viper hadn't survived this long by being unprepared. He grabbed the nearest person, Frank, who'd been frozen against the wall in terror, and put a gun to his head. "Call them off, Park! Call them off, or I kill this idiot!" Taeyeon didn't even hesitate. "Kill him. He tried to drug a woman and then sold her to you to save himself. He's worthless." Frank made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. Teresa watched from her hiding place, torn between horror and fascination. This was Taeyeon's world, cold, calculating, where mercy was a weakness and hesitation got you killed. But she also saw something else. She saw Taeyeon's eyes scanning the warehouse, searching for her, making sure she was safe even as he negotiated with a man who wanted him dead. The Viper's hand shook slightly. He'd expected Taeyeon to fold, to trade his people's lives for Frank's. He'd miscalculated. "You're not walking out of here," Taeyeon said quietly. "But I'll give you a choice. Surrender now. Go to ground in another city, and we never speak of this again. Or fight, and I'll make sure everyone in your organization knows you were beaten by a trap you walked into willingly." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the Viper shoved Frank forward and dropped his gun. "This isn't over, Park." "Yes," Taeyeon said. "It is." The Viper's men were being zip-tied, disarmed, herded into a corner. The Viper himself was being escorted out by 2 of Taeyeon's people, who looked like they very much wanted an excuse to hurt him. Frank fell to his knees, sobbing, and Teresa stood up from behind the shipping containers, her legs shaky, her whole body trembling with adrenaline. Taeyeon turned, and their eyes met across the warehouse. He started walking toward her. She started walking toward him. They met in the middle, And Teresa saw it in slow motion, the shooter on the catwalk that everyone had missed. The Viper's insurance policy, his finger already squeezing the trigger. Taeyeon! He moved faster than should have been possible, pulling her behind him, his body shielding hers. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Taeyeon grunted, staggered, but stayed on his feet. The shooter didn't get a second chance. 3 of Taeyeon's men fired simultaneously, and the figure on the catwalk fell. Teresa's hands were on Taeyeon immediately, searching for the wound. His left shoulder, blood already seeping through his white shirt. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was tight with pain. "You're shot. It's barely a graze." "You took a bullet for me." "Yes," he said simply, as if that was the most natural thing in the world. The warehouse emptied quickly after that. The Viper and his men were taken somewhere Teresa tried not to think about. Frank was handed over to actual police, apparently. Taeyeon had enough evidence of his gambling, drug possession, and attempted assault to ensure he'd be in prison for years. And Teresa found herself in the back of a Mercedes SUV, pressing a clean cloth to Taeyeon's shoulder while his driver navigated through Brooklyn toward a private doctor who didn't ask questions. "You're insane," she told him as they drove. "You could have been killed." "So could you. I'm not the one who walked into a building full of armed men. Neither did I. I walked into a building full of my armed men who'd been there for 2 hours before the Viper even arrived." He winced as the car hit a pothole. "We had control of the situation the entire time, except for the sniper you missed." "Except for that," he admitted. "Which is why heads are going to roll in my security team tomorrow." Teresa pressed harder on the wound, and he hissed. "Sorry," she said. "Not sorry at all. You're angry. I'm terrified. Do you have any idea what it was like watching you walk in there? Knowing you were doing it for me. Probably about as terrifying as knowing you'd walked into a trap because you were trying to protect your friend's brother." Taeyeon caught her hand with his good one, his fingers warm around hers. "We're both fools, Teresa. The question is whether we're going to be fools together or separately." The doctor's office, really a converted brownstone in Park Slope, was clean and efficient. The doctor, an older Korean woman who called Taeyeon that reckless boy in her native language, confirmed it was indeed just a graze, cleaned and bandaged it, and prescribed rest and antibiotics. "No getting shot for at least a month," she said sternly. "I mean it, Taeyeon. I'll do my best, Dr. Kim." Back in the car, Teresa finally allowed herself to fall apart. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Taeyeon pulled her against his good side, and she buried her face in his chest and cried. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry I walked into the trap. I'm sorry I put you in danger. I'm sorry." "Shh." His hand stroked her hair. "You did what you thought was right. You protected someone you loved. I would have done the same. This is your life," she whispered. "This violence, this danger. How do you live like this?" "Very carefully, and usually alone." He tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "But Teresa, I don't want to be alone anymore. The moment I saw you in that restaurant, something shifted. I've spent 15 years building walls, creating distance, making sure no one could be used against me. And then you walked into my life and shattered every rule I'd set for myself." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm falling for you, recklessly, dangerously, in a way that makes me vulnerable in ways I've never allowed myself to be vulnerable before." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I'm also saying that this life, my life, isn't safe. It might never be safe. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. I'll make sure you're protected, that Frank and the Viper never come near you again. You can go back to your normal life." Teresa thought about her normal life, her safe apartment, her predictable job, her string of disappointing relationships with men who made promises they never kept. Then she thought about Taeyeon taking a bullet for her, about the way he'd been honest when he could have lied, about how alive she felt when she was with him. even when she was terrified. "What if I don't want normal?" she asked. "Then you're crazier than I am." "Probably." She kissed him, soft and careful, mindful of his injury. "But I'm done playing it safe. I'm done with men who don't know what they want. You're dangerous and criminal, and you operate in a world I don't understand. But you saved me. Twice. And you've never lied to me. And when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally breathe." Taeyeon kissed her back, deeper this time, his good hand tangling in her hair. "This won't be easy," he warned when they finally broke apart. "I don't want easy. I want real. There will be danger. There's danger everywhere. At least with you, I know someone's watching my back. I'll have to legitimize more of my operations. I won't ask you to be part of the criminal side of my life." "Can you do that? Legitimize things?" "I've been planning to for years. I just never had a reason to follow through." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "Now I do." Teresa rested her head on his shoulder, careful of his injury, and let the motion of the car lull her into a sense of peace she hadn't felt in days. "Where are we going?" she asked drowsily. "My place. You're staying with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll make sure your apartment is properly secured, and next week, I'm assigning you a permanent security detail whether you like it or not. Bossy, you have no idea. I'm getting one, though." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. "Taeyeon?" Teresa said finally. "Thank you. For saving me. For being honest. For being you." His arm tightened around her. "Thank you for being reckless enough to give a criminal a chance. We're both fools," she echoed his earlier words. "Yes," he agreed. "But we're fools together." And as the car carried them through the Brooklyn night toward an uncertain but undeniably real future, Teresa Brown, cautious, independent, rule-following Teresa made peace with the fact that sometimes the safest choice is the most dangerous one. Sometimes trust means closing your eyes and falling, and sometimes the man who saves you is the one you never saw coming.